the format is that I'm going to start and talk about the purpose of today's discussion, and then the format, and followed by introductions. Um, the Air Chief Air Chief Marshal Kaleem Sadat will be the first speaker for his welcome speech, and then the two panelists, Ambassador Jalil Abbas Jilani and Dr. Osman Chauhan, will follow. That will be followed by a Q&A session. So are we all in the understanding of that? Is that format? Okay.
Yes.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I see that the chat has begun in question and answer. So for all those who are watching, for our friends, please hold your questions till the end of the discussion when both speakers have spoken. I want to welcome everyone. First of all, what a delight it is when I see everyone across the screen. The panel is such a prestigious and such a learned company that I'm in, that I'm excited for everyone watching. First of all, I'll start with the purpose of the discussion today. The topic is the U.S. and Pakistan politics, diplomacy, and economics under the next administration. We all know that the next U.S. general election is just around the corner. We also know that President Trump has extracted coronavirus, and we wish him well. We wish him, both him and First Lady, speedy recovery. The objectives of this discussion, we have broken it down in 4 different objectives. The first one will be to discuss the political, diplomatic, and economic elements of the U.S. and Pakistan relationship going forward. The second one will be to highlight the major domestic, regional, and global considerations shaping the U.S. and Pakistani interests. The third one will be to share Pakistani perspective on changing contours of bilateral relationship under the next administration. And the final will be to sensitize the Pakistani diaspora, the Pakistani Americans who are watching, about the issues critical to Pakistan's future and seek their input in the conduct of diplomacy and advocacy. We can talk further about how to break these, but I'll leave that to the panel as we forward the discussion. Before we go to the panel, though, I would like to introduce the president of CAS. CAS is Center for Airspace and Security Studies. Air Chief Marshal Kaleem Sadat is the president, and he's been in the Air Force for almost 38 years. He's served. He has held command and staff appointments. He has the master's in defense and strategic studies, and he's also a graduate of ESGI and CSI from Paris, France. He was a member of directing staff at Air War College, Pakistan Air Force, and chief instructor at National Defense University, National Defense College, which is now called NDU, National Defense University. He's now patron-in-chief of Thinkers Forum Pakistan, of which he had been president and contributing writer for 6 years. He has been the patron of Pakistan Ex-Servicemen Association. He has keen interest in war, peace, air power, employment, and development, as well as global security and politics. Air Chief Marshal Kaleem Sadat, welcome. Please.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good morning to everyone in the United States. It's always a pleasure to talk to fellow Pakistanis wherever in the world they may be. Mr. Nadeem Zaman and all the distinguished and eminent Pakistanis who may be attending this webinar, I welcome you, and it's a pleasure talking to you. We Pakistanis, especially those living abroad, they may be living anywhere, but when they hear of Pakistan, there is something that works inside. That link with the country remains, and it is very strong. I understand that Pakistani diaspora in the United States is the 6th largest in the world. which is considerable, and you are very able ambassadors, and you are professionals in your own field, and you have earned the respect of your host countries. It is sad that in Pakistan, we are unable to utilize all your expertise, all your skills, all your knowledge, etc., because we have not been able to yet create a economy that could do that. However, you contribute in your own way by being overseas in many different ways. Uh, as of, let's say, for the last 10, 15 years, since universities like LUMS, IBA, NUST, etc., they are contributing, they are sending students to the United States, to UK, to Australia, and places like that. And they are doing very well. And they are, we could, nationally, we could rule the brain drain. But a long time ago, The Economist magazine said that it is better to have brain drain than to have brain in the drain. So, we are our students who ultimately find jobs over there and who excel over there are an asset of Pakistan. Of course, like Mr. Nadeem said, that we have competition with the Chinese and the Indians everywhere. And basically, they are too numerous. There are far too many Chinese and Indians that have to find jobs elsewhere. But I'm confident, and I've experienced that man to man and woman to woman, we are match for everyone around the world. In fact, in some places, they do much better than them, especially in the higher bracket of jobs, etc. For us, at the end of the day, the question remains that our diaspora, what can it contribute for Pakistan? How can it influence policy in their host countries in favor of Pakistan? That is our primary question. The Pakistan-US relations, as you are all aware, has seen ups and downs, and there have been oscillations. We were a non-NATO ally at the best of times, and then we were sanctioned for 10 years at a stretch. So these are the kind of variations that have taken place in our mutual relationship. And essentially, they have been driven by the American interests. As things stand, because it's an asymmetric relationship, what the Americans desire, that happens. When they want to disengage, they disengage. When they want to engage, they engage. And now we are coming up with another enigma, and that is this competition between China and America. So we have had relationship with both. With the Chinese, it has been more consistent. With the Americans, it has been more variable. So if this competition becomes acute, then Pakistan would be in a difficult situation to being forced to choose sides. And but it is going to be a very, very, very difficult situation, a very difficult decision. But what we are focusing today is how we could tackle this situation in view of the next forthcoming elections. And our panelists today will set the stage for the relationship, what it could possibly be, what it should be, and how do we go about it, and what are the possible axes along which we need to work. So with these brief remarks, I will stop, and I will let the other panelists speak.
Thank you so much, Chief Sadat. Thank you so much. Before I introduce the next two speakers, I want to add and I want to recognize those who have joined. I know they're representatives of PAC, which is Pakistani Political Action Committee. Then we have members of APPAC, which is American Pakistani Political Action Committee. We also have members of American United PAC, which typically, they lobby for Pakistani-friendly candidates. We also have friends from Kashmir Solidarity Council. We have members of Pak American Business Forum. Thank you so much for joining. We have founder of the Crescent Foundation. They do philanthropic work in Pakistan. We have friends from CARE and ICNA Relief. So thank you all joining. You all know who you are. Too many names here. So thank you all for joining us. We'll go ahead and move forward now. It is my honor to uh, introduce an old friend of our community, Ambassador Jalil Abbas Jilani. Um, Ambassador has a 38 years of bilateral and multilateral experience as a career diplomat, having served as Pakistan's ambassador to United States, Belgium, Luxembourg, and EU and Australia. Ambassador Jilani also served as the Foreign Secretary of Pakistan, the top civil service official in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A specialist in South Asian affairs, Ambassador Jilani has worked as Director General of South Asia and SAARC, Deputy Acting High Commissioner to India and Director India in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In 2018, the government of Pakistan nominated Ambassador Jilani as member of the Experts and Eminent Persons Group, EEP, of the ASEAN Regional Forum, and later in 2019 as member of the Prime Minister's Advisory Council on Foreign Affairs. Most recently, Ambassador Jilani has served as a senior fellow at both the International Institute of Strategic Studies and the United States Institute of Peace. Ambassador Jilani, welcome.
Thank you so much, Nadeem Zaban Sahab. It's a great pleasure seeing you after a long time. And through you, I would like to convey my best wishes and greetings and regards to all members of Pakistani American community in the United States of America, whose support and cooperation would always be remembered when I served in Washington. Not only this time when I was ambassador of Pakistan, but also previously when I was the deputy ambassador from 1995 to 1999. And all these organizations that you have mentioned, whether it's PAC, AP PAC, or Pakistani American PAC, or the Kashmir Solidarity Council, Pakistan American Business Council, CARE, ISNA there. Again, they were great friends of the Embassy of Pakistan, and they extended every possible cooperation. Talking about Pakistan-India relations, we need to keep the following factors in mind. This is number one, this is the most important, most complex, most talked about, and least understood relation. Secondly, we need to understand that we do not have the kind of convergences that we enjoyed during the Cold War, when the US and the Soviet Union were pitted against each other. During the Cold War, we decided to align our interests with the US, whereas India chose to be a part of the Soviet Union-led alliance. Thirdly, even though we were part of the US-led alliance, our interests largely differed. There were no truly common and shared strategic interests at any time, which is necessary to form a genuine alliance. To give you an example, that for the US, the most important foreign policy and security objective was to contain the spread of communism. For us, the most important concern was the security threat that Pakistan faced vis-a-vis India. It was a large country with which we had so many complications, mainly the unresolved issue of Jammu and Kashmir. We had a very, very tense relationship with India, and we needed the support of the US and the Western countries to meet our security needs. Fourthly, I think we need to understand that although our interests differed, they were important and provided the basis of cooperation during the Cold War and to some degree today. Pakistan has always been preoccupied with its security, as I mentioned earlier, vis-a-vis India, while US interests, previously they were focused on the Soviet Union, and recently on terrorism, Afghanistan, China, and Iran in our part of the world. Fifthly, both the US and Pakistan benefited tremendously from this relationship. Pakistan received critical defense supplies, received support on the Kashmir issue in the initial years, and economic assistance. We were able to build 2 large dams, Tarbela and Mangla, with US assistance, established educational institutions, and the office complex in the newly established capital, which is Islamabad. Our students, civil servants, and members of the armed forces were trained in the US. Pakistan also received financial and budgetary support from the US besides endorsement of development assistance from the World Bank, IMF, IFC, ADB, etc. The United States, on the other hand, also benefited tremendously from Pakistan's participation in the CETO, CENTO, and Pakistan acting as a frontline state for the promotion of US strategic interests in South Asia and Middle East. Pakistan also played the most critical role in the defeat of Soviet Union and Afghanistan, a war which was extremely cost effective for the US. And this was the only war in recent history that was comprehensively won by the United States of America and became the sole supreme power. Lastly, the nature of this relationship has transformed since the 90s. Following the demise of Soviet Union, despite Pakistan playing a critical role in the collapse of Soviet Union, the US began to align and recalibrate its relations in the region by pivoting towards India. With the emergence of China as a major competitor of the US and India have begun to develop strategic cooperation. Since President Clinton's visit to India in March 2000, the United States' relationship with India has been described as the most formidable relationship by every US administration, whether it was the Democrat administration or the Republican administration. We began to witness a downward in our relations since the 90s. I think mostly, to be correct, it should be, if we call it from mid-90s onward. Whereas US-India relations have registered an upward trajectory. As part of this strategic relationship and special status that US has accorded to India, and mind you, this is the same status that US has accorded to India, which has been accorded by the US to its European allies, to Australia, to Japan, and some other countries with whom it has a very, like Israel. India-US cooperation in almost every field has reached new heights, as can be reflected in the following developments. Number one, both the United States of America and India cooperate on matters related to South Asia on a regular basis. Number two, India has emerged as a pivot of the United States Indo-Pacific strategy. Now, this is the Indo-Pacific strategy. This was previously known as Asia-Pacific strategy, and this was announced by the Obama administration. The Trump administration has only changed the nomenclature of Asia-Pacific strategy while retaining the same contours that Obama's policy contained vis-a-vis Asia and Indo-Pacific, Asia-Pacific, but the nomenclature was changed to Indo-Pacific. Then, India has been accorded a de jure nuclear status following the signature of Agreement 123 that you recall was signed in 2008 between the US and India. India is also part of Quad, an alliance of like-minded countries against China. Quad includes Japan, Australia, India, and the United States of America. And now there are suggestions coming from the top level of the US administration that it should be expanded to Quad Plus. The Quad Plus would translate into something known as Asian NATO. So the idea is to basically to transform Quad into an Asia NATO, and the configuration could be from Israel to Middle East to South Asian countries to Asia Pacific countries, which would be ultimately be used vis-a-vis against China. So these are the plans, the long-term plan. There are many other logistic and intelligence agreements which the United States of America has signed with India, which also creates instability in our part of the world. India has also emerged as the largest recipient of US military assistance. It's number third, in terms of largest buyers that the United States of America is concerned of its military equipment. If you recall that on 5th August last year, when India took this very unfortunate step of repealing Article 370 of the Indian Constitution, which granted special status to the Indian occupied Kashmir, the US opted to remain silent. And then US in recent years has also been opposed to Belt and Road Initiative, including China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which Pakistan considers is the lifeline of Pakistan-China relations as far as the economic cooperation is concerned. One thing that for the consumption of my dear friends from Pakistani American community, I would like to mention that in building this relationship, one, obviously there is a strategic shift which has taken place in the overall thinking of the US administrations, whether it's Democratic administration or the Republican administration. But then the Indian diaspora has also played a very, very important role. And I'm sure that you would bear me out that pro-India lobbies they exist everywhere. The pro-India lobbies exist in the Congress, very strong lobbies in the administration, in the think tanks community, in the media. And they are all, they act as anti-Pakistan lobbies. Then there is a very strong anti-China lobby, which also has become anti-Pakistan because that there is a significant hype about China in the US informed circle, in think tanks, in the administration, in the media, and China is presented as a major threat, if not now, but say in the next 2 or 3 decades. Then there is a non-proliferation lobby, which looks at Pakistan's nuclear program with a prejudiced lens, and they have not really recognized Pakistan's nuclear program. Jewish lobby is another lobby which also plays an important role. Afghan lobby is there. There are Islamophobes And then there are people whom I describe as the opportunist lobby, because they are the ones, unfortunately, they are our own people. But in order to curry favor with the lobbies, anti-Pakistan lobbies, within the administration, within think tanks, they also badmouth Pakistan. What is the future of this relationship? This, I'm sure, would be the question which on the minds of every Pakistani American. Well, we have to admit that the United States would continue to be a great power for decades to come, despite its declining global profile. It will exercise influence in Europe, Asia, Africa, and Middle East. It will have influence in the spheres of trade, finance, security, and disarmament. We should be mindful of the fact that despite their differences, the US and Pakistan will also compete and cooperate economically at the same time and avoid an outright confrontation due to economic, security, and strategic reasons. Economically, China has come at par with the US. It has now focused on military buildup. It has developed some of the most sophisticated weaponry, aircraft carriers, and drone technology, which is almost at par with the US. But then still the US, in terms of military capability, it remains very, very strong. We should be confident of the fact that there is not going to be a major confrontation between Pakistan and the United States of America, which obviously makes Pakistan's options relatively easy in the sense that we have to convince the US administration, whether you are on the Republican side or the other side, that Pakistan's relationship are as old as Pakistan's relationship, our relationship with China are as old as our relationship with the United States of America. We have never played one against the other, despite our close relationship with both power centers. And as a matter of fact, we have always played the role of a bridge between our two countries, between United States of America and China. If you recall, and if you read Henry Kissinger's book titled On China, he has devoted full one chapter in describing how Pakistan played this role in bringing about rapprochement between China and the US, and that rapprochement also helped the US in the promotion of its foreign policy objectives. We also need to understand that that almost all countries, they face non-traditional threats like climate change, terrorism, nuclear proliferation, weapons of mass destruction, maintaining of the existing economic order, maintaining of the existing security order, because of which our cooperation will be of critical importance. We also need to apprise the US administration on both sides of the aisle that Pakistan recognizes the importance of the US importance in the global affairs. Pakistan understands the compulsions which has prompted the US to have a tilt towards India. Pakistan also understands the limitations which are imposed on the US because of the current economic downturn. So accordingly, Pakistan, our expectations are extremely realistic as far as the US is concerned. We feel that even if there is no relationship of assistance between Pakistan and the United States of America, we need to cooperate in order to expand our economic relations. And the expansion of economic relations can take place by having this strong trade relations, investment relations, and by promoting business-to-business contacts between the two sides. The Trump administration took a very wise decision recently to focus more on building this economic relationship between our two countries. If you recall, Nadeem Sahab, that during my tenure in Washington, our focus was also economic development, and with the help of the Pakistani American community, we were able to organize 3 business opportunity conferences between Pakistan and the US. One was held in Washington, one was held in New York, and the third business opportunity conference was held in Islamabad, where Secretary Commerce Penny Pritzker also participated. So these are important. Then, we also need to apprise the US administration that Pakistan plays the most critical role in this region. As the confrontation is developing between US and China in the Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific region, again, Pakistan, because of its very close cooperation, can play the role of a bridge. Secondly, Iran, which is our neighbor. We share 1,000 kilometers long border with Iran. Iran and US do not have diplomatic relations, and Pakistan represents the Iranian interests in Washington, which is also beneficial for the United States of America, because we have been a friend and ally in the past, and certainly we will play the role of a neutral arbitrator between US and Iran. So this is the context that we have to. A word about the Pakistani American community. As I mentioned, that this was my second posting to Washington from 2013 to 2017. I was earlier posted in the 90s, from 95 to 99 in Washington, DC. At that time, the Pakistani saw few Pakistani Americans in the US administration or in the congressional offices or in the think tanks. But now, this time when I was posted there, I saw a large number of Pakistani Americans in the State Department. I met a large number of Pakistani Americans in the White House. There were more than a dozen, excuse me, Pakistani Americans who were in the White House. There are Pakistani Americans in the Department of Defense, and in congressional offices. Again, it was heartening to see a large number of Pakistani Americans. So this is a very good trajectory that is being followed by the younger generation of Pakistani Americans. At the same time, I think we need to encourage our children to follow this course, because by following this course, Pakistani American community will not only become influential in almost every walk of life, but also be helpful to their country of birth. In the same context, I would also like to mention that it is equally important that while the members of the Pakistani American community from the first generation, they know Pakistan very well. They know the positives and the negatives of both. They are exposed to that. But then it is extremely important that the second generation or the third generation of Pakistani Americans, the generation next, should also be familiar with what their country of forefathers is. A very important step would be to organize their trips to Pakistan. This is something which is of paramount importance, because as they work in the respective offices, they would know as to what is Pakistan's perspective on various issues. Afghanistan, for instance, we have convergences of views with the United States of America. Maybe a large number of people, they do not know, because for a very long time, we had divergences on Afghanistan. For the last 1 year, we have developed convergences on Afghanistan. And in the years to come, Pakistan and the US will cooperate very, very closely in order to bring about peace and stability in Afghanistan. My last word is the election, as to what is likely to happen. It is anybody's guess as to what is going to happen, whether Mr. Biden or Mr. Trump would be elected in the election, which is going to take place on um, I think over the years, as I mentioned earlier, that developing a strong strategic partnership with the US has been described as the most important foreign policy objective by every administration since the 90s. I will not see any major shift in this policy. It is not likely to take place. Their tilt towards India would remain. There is going to be a difference, however, in the style. I have dealt with the Obama administration because my stay in Washington was mostly during the Obama administration. And we had interacted with Mr. Biden on several occasions when he was the vice president. We need to recognize that as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, when Mr. Biden was the chairman, he was instrumental in promoting this bill, which subsequently came to be known as Kerry-Berman-Lugar Bill, committing economic assistance to Pakistan worth more than $7 billion. He is somebody who is very well known to Pakistan. He has visited Pakistan many times, and he knows people at the personal level. So that is kind of when I talk as a Pakistani, when I say, I feel that he would be somebody who would be more receptive to listening to Pakistan's point of view with great patience. Secondly, the thing is that Mr. Biden in the past relied mostly on professional foreign policy experts, professionals who were again well versed with the region, and because of which, while there used to be pressure on Pakistan, but the pressure used to be kind of bearable pressure on Pakistan. But at the same time, we could also discuss things with them face-to-face cooperative relationship. We made some very good progress at that time. We established a strategic dialogue with the United States of America. There were 8 working groups which were established. And we took this dialogue process to the highest political level, which is very, very important. Unfortunately, that dialogue process with Pakistan was downgraded during the Trump administration, at least for the first year and also the second year. It was only in the third year that it began to improve. What I'm trying to say is that whosoever comes into power, it is extremely important for us, because I know the influence that you people have with members of the Congress in your respective areas. I know that they rely on your support for their own electoral victories. And at the same time, they would also be receptive to anything that you tell them. Obviously, my request to members of the Pakistani American community would be, number one, they say, you can tell them that you may, we understand your compulsions to lean towards India because of the China factor. But at the same time, since Pakistan has been an ally in the past, Pakistan will also be helpful in contributing to your in promoting your foreign policy objectives in the future also. So accordingly, there is to be a balanced approach that needs to be followed between US in respect of India and Pakistan relations. We have witnessed, for instance, that during Trump administration, President Trump did mention about mediating in Kashmir, but then it was not followed up by actions. the kind of role, the active role that the US administration played in the past in diffusing tension between our two countries, in bringing about in restoring the dialogue process to discuss Kashmir and other issues. That was very helpful. So increased US focus on diffusing tension in our region is something which is also of paramount importance for the. And lastly, I would say that I mentioned about Iran and Afghanistan. Pakistan will certainly play a very, very helpful role. We are playing that helpful role. The US administration has recognized that role that Pakistan is extending, and that in case tomorrow there is a desire on the part of the US administration for Pakistan to play a role in removing some kind of a hurdles in the revival of dialogue between Iran and the US, Pakistan will be happy to play that role. And in the context of China, as I mentioned, that despite the growing competition, Pakistan will continue to play the role of a bridge between the two countries. And I thank you here.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Jilani, I just want to build on what you have just presented. That especially your advice and to the Pakistani Americans in engaging both parties, and I know you've been preaching this when you were an ambassador. I remember you used to say that each one of you is ambassador of Pakistan. So in that context, especially pointing out towards the Kerry Lugar bill and the significance of something like that, our understanding towards this, and then making sure that somebody like Biden, who has that background, and as a diaspora, we understand that he has the capacity to deliver something, a bill like Kerry Lugar bill. I do not have the details as to what the delivery of that bill was, but the significance of that is very important. So thank you for pointing that out. I did forget a couple of things, and as I was listening to you, I remember when you mentioned your visit to this part of the country, that ambassador was the one who actually who raised Pakistan's flag at the City Hall in Dallas for the first time. So that was the first. It was a good memory. I think they have the pictures of that. And the second one was also very significant that the Air Chief will be very happy to hear, is that the ambassador was the first ambassador of any country ever to lecture at the Air War College in Montgomery, Alabama. So I just wanted to mention that. So thank you so much, Ambassador. I'm going to proceed now and introduce our next speaker, Dr. Osman Chauhan. And Dr. Chauhan is an international economist and academic who specializes in the fields of public value theory, parliamentary fiscal scrutiny, the One Belt and One Road, and cryptocurrencies. He has previously had key affiliations with World Economic Forum, the World Bank, the National Bank of Canada. He was included among Australia's 50 top thinkers by The Conversation 2016, and he's among the top 20 business authors out of the 12,000 authors, and the top 30 overall authors out of the 30,000 authors on the Social Science Research Network, which is the largest open repository of knowledge in the world. In the academic realm, his research has been cited widely as, for example, in the World Trade Organization, the European Parliament, the National Bureau of Economic Research, quantitative finance, the IEEE, the OECD, the ABC, the Sydney Morning Herald, the BBC, Genome Research, Gizmodo, among many others. His doctoral work at UNSW, the University of New South Wales, Australia, was to create the world's first multidisciplinary synthesis of independent fiscal institution, and was to create the world's institution, and was his postdoctoral fellowship with the New South Wales was to continue that line of inquiry. I can go on and on, Dr. Osman. I think I'll stop here and let you continue as the objective of this talk. It's my honor to introduce you, and I see that you have, as a perfect mathematician, you already have your PowerPoint. So, Dr. Osman, take it away.
Thank you, Nadeem Zaman Saab. It's my pleasure to be addressing the Pakistani American community. My perspective will be situated in the economics, and I'd like to share with you a certain style of thinking and a certain orientation of thinking about how things might proceed between the United States and Pakistan in the next administration, with ramifications beyond that. So I'm struggling a little bit with my slides, but the structure is this. We will talk about the backdrop in which everything is happening, which is coronavirus. I think it's very important for the community to understand, especially people abroad, question why Pakistan has done so well and what that means for Pakistan's future and how it contrasts with the United States. I will build a little bit or add a little bit to the very important remarks made by Ambassador Jilani about the Quad and China, because that's important for our orientation. There is a positive to talk about, which is CPEC. It's a positive driver, and then there's a negative driver I'll contrast that with, which is the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, which we call FATF here. And then some conclusions about that are not just economic, but socioeconomic and political as well. So let's start with the coronavirus aspect. If you look at the graph, the United States with its number of cases is astronomical. India is catching up quickly. Brazil is also very high. And if you look at Pakistan, is way down there at the bottom, which strikes people as something surprising at the very least. Deaths on this slide, similar. The deaths are very high in the United States as well. This is not a surprise to you. You hear it 24/7 on the news, but it's important to understand why Pakistan has survived it so well. And one thing that they complain about in the news is that Pakistan simply wasn't doing enough testing. I believe this to be false, because if you look at the positivity rate of Pakistan, India, and the United States is below 10%. So I simply don't buy that argument that you're not testing enough people, because there's plenty of people who are being tested and there are just not enough positive cases. So who are you going to test? So I simply don't buy that. And I think it's a very good thing that we have such a low rate of cases. Pakistan's success comes in two parts. One is the structural factors. It's our demography and stuff. And the other is policy. So when you look at our structural aspects, the first thing is that we are a young population. 70% of us are under the age of 30. I'm an old man in this country. Our obesity rate is also very low. It's 8%. Interestingly, India's is even lower, a vegetarian society, 4%. So you would think both would do well, but Pakistan did well because its obesity rate is low. In the United States, according to the World Health Organization, it's 36% obese, not overweight, but obese. You see those people. I mean, Nadeem Zaman Saab, you're in Texas, you get quite a few of those folks down there. So obesity is a very big problem in America, and that has had repercussions because of the comorbidity between having obesity and the factors in your vital organs that are reproduced. Our conservative culture is a big part of this because women do not occupy the public sphere as frequently and as frivolously in this society as they do in other countries where both men and women have to hustle. That has actually been a positive. Say what you will about conservative cultures, you may have your value judgments. I don't, but I see the merits for conservative cultures when it comes to quarantine, because an Iranian study has shown that about 90% of people in Pakistan who did get COVID were men. So the low urban design, low rises, you don't have to go through elevators and that stuff. So the structure of our cities actually helped a lot too. And then the BCG vaccination is hypothesized to help because BCG was meant for tuberculosis, but it has a non-specific immunity for leprosy. And it's believed that it also has one for coronavirus, but this has to be tested. And the rate of BCG testing in Pakistan is 86%. In India, it's 90%. And another reason you would think they would do well, but they didn't. The policy factor is where we did very well, and that's because we had smart lockdowns. Prime Minister Imran Khan said, I simply cannot close down this economy, people will starve. And so you had, for example, in this city where I am, Islamabad, you had a G6, G7, I-10, I-9, like that. Wherever there was a case, you would lock down, but society was still continuing its progress. There is a lot of social solidarity in Pakistan. This is heartening for the Pakistani American community to realize, is that maybe it's that Islamic culture or whatever, that hamdardi, that sympathy with the dispossessed. And so people were looked out for here. That is not true of India, for example, because there's a Hindu-Muslim divide as well, the caste system, where Brahmins are simply not expected to take care of the untouchables, for example. That's what really made them panic over there. The the tireless work of our doctors. Many of the audience are doctors as well. You know how hard the people have been working. That's universal. It helped. Protecting our rural areas was key because this hospital and the healthcare facilities in the rural areas are simply not good enough. So we were not letting people go into the rural areas. Wherever you were at the time of lockdowns, that's where you stayed. That was important. In India, people panicked and fled for the countryside, created community transmission pools, and then brought that back to the cities. And that was a disaster. Stimulus program, about 5% of GDP, roughly, if you add different variants and elements of what the state bank has done in terms of putting loans forward, putting actual money into the system, et cetera. It's a very large amount given how restrained our resources are. And so because of this, Pakistan, alhamdulillah, has succeeded in keeping the coronavirus down, but the consequences of this permeate into the economic sphere. So if you look at the GDP growth quarter on quarter for the last quarter versus the year before 2019, India is devastated, Spain, United Kingdom, et cetera, and China is the only one on this graph that looks bad. It doesn't mention Pakistan, so on the following slide, I have presented what the forecasts are. Pakistan will only get about a 0.4% drop. It's really not the end of the world. I mean, lockdowns did have their impact, but the forecasts are that in the subsequent financial year, there'll be a growth of 2%, which is remarkable that we would have this economic growth, so that the stasis has not come into the economic momentum for Pakistan. And the GDP growth rate, if you look at South Asia, apart from societies that are very isolated and small like Bhutan and Nepal, Pakistan does fairly well. Maldives, which is tourism-based, is devastated. India, because of its mismanagement, is devastated, but Pakistan is fine. So I'm very, it heartens me to report that. But GDP is just one element of the problem that we see here. Inflation is the other thing that's big, but that is not coronavirus dependent. The reason that Pakistan's inflation rate right now is hovering around 8 to 10%, possibly higher, is because of Tiddidal, the locust infestation, and Selab, so the floods. And those are climate-related issues. The locust swarm here is because of climatic patterns changing in the Middle East and then devastating Africa and South Asia. That is a global problem. We have to work together. And as Pakistani Americans, you have to advocate this to your political establishment that you should not ignore the science. We all have to work together on this, the Paris Accords, for example, and that sort of thing. And the same for floods. So those parts of our economy are being attacked, but that's a global problem. I'm not going to spend too much time on the ideology and the China and the Quad element because Sir Jalil Abbas covered this meticulously, but the thinking of Uncle Sam is to cordon off through at least 4 powers and then the Quad plus, as Sir Jalil Abbas said, that it's to contain China. A lot of the policies that have been undertaken by the United States to punish China have actually backfired. As this excellent cartoon says, there's a bazooka of the trade war, but the damage of that has actually hit Uncle Sam more than it would the Chinese. And the Chinese have retaliated at about the same tariff levels across the rates and the product categories that would strike at Uncle Sam. And the reason that this is so difficult to do, you try to punish China economically, is that there's so much entanglement of the economies of the United States and China. So if China says, if things don't improve between us, I will walk away in anger. And then the United States says, no, I will walk away in anger. But there's so much entanglement of supply chains, of investment, that's simply not possible to do that overnight. It would take a very long time. Basically, over the last 20 years, a lot of the earnings per share growth in the Fortune 500 companies has come from their China story, both the markets as well as the supply chain. So to disentangle from that is not something that corporate America really wants. Here's a cartoon from Southeast Asia where it says there's the Chinese bully and the US bully, and Southeast Asia has to pick a side. I don't want to categorize the United States or China as bullies. I don't buy that. And Pakistan doesn't buy that either. As Sir Jalil Abbas mentioned, Pakistan would ideally like to strike a positive balance between both and be a bridge. Mueed Yusuf Saab, our national security advisor, said if one country does 10 projects in Pakistan, the other country should do 20 projects in Pakistan, and that would be very, very good for us and for them. So we're not looking to pick sides. But here's the thing. As far as this is the United States ambassador designate, William Todd. He was asked about his priorities in his congressional confirmation. And the main elements that were mentioned were Afghanistan, India, terrorism, nuclear, etc. I didn't hear enough about economics because they still view us through the prism of violence. We are the imagined other as the bad guy, the scapegoat for their misadventures around the world. And it's part of that Islamophobic streak as well. And so economics simply doesn't come in their mind. As the Pakistani American community, I urge you to lobby hard to add this lens into our perception of the relations, that economics is important and should be really at the top of this list, but they don't. And that's the problem. In the meantime, China does view a shared co-prosperity, 合作 in Mandarin. They view it as part of their vision for the world beyond them. CPEC is one part of that. It is in phase 2 now. Phase 1 already has occurred with the basic layout of infrastructure across energy, highways, and so on. Now phase 2 involves a larger private sector element, and then there'll be a phase 3. And this is phased out over a longer period. It's a $62 billion project, and what Pakistan was really starving for was not talent, it was starving for capital. This is the capital that lays the infrastructure for Pakistanis, both residing here and the diaspora, to build upon. So there are hostile narratives to that. You hear some skepticism in America, but you especially hear it in India, as this cartoon shows, that elephant trudges on its own momentum because Pakistan and China are committed to it, but India is trying to hold it back. It's not succeeding. Here are some images. So for example, the Gwadar Coastal Highway, the Gwadar Port, power stations, etc. Literally the architecture is being changed quietly. There isn't so much fanfare. It happens silently, and it's the foundational architecture for a new economy, a 21st century economy. That's the good side, but now I want to talk a little bit about a negative that's important. It's the Financial Action Task Force. This is a self-appointed watchdog that looks at how countries are doing in terms of terrorist financing and money laundering. It was created in 1989, and it was meant to stop basically the illegal transfer of funds from the Soviet Union republics, former Soviet Union republics, into Western Europe. After 9/11, it became a kind of scapegoat to punish countries if it was suspected that there was terror financing. It's been blown out of proportion. Pakistan has been put on the gray list and been threatened with the blacklist. I have studied it quite intimately and found it to be a sham. And the reason is the new FinCEN leaks as corroboration of that. Yes, Pakistan's systems work in the informal, and that's just how the developing world is. That's how the third world is. But to punish it so severely doesn't make sense. And the scope of that was provided by FinCEN. FinCEN is an arm of the United States Treasury where banks submit suspicious reports. And when you looked at the 2000 leaks that came out in the 2000 documents, it was about $2.2 trillion in scope. And the biggest perpetrators were JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank, Bank of New York Mellon, etc. India was 800 million out of that. Pakistan was $2 million. And all of India's major financial institutions were at some degree implicated. That doesn't mean they're guilty, but that means that they have found something suspicious and they didn't do anything about it. And so the way this is working in terms of money laundering and terrorist financing and sanctioning Pakistan simply does not make sense in the scope of things. Pakistan's economy isn't even that large, but theirs are large. And if you really want to fix money laundering in the world, you'd go straight to New York, you'd go to Frankfurt and London. So I think that as Pakistani Americans, it's important for you to familiarize yourself with FATF, what it does, and why it is picking on Pakistan in such an irrational manner, given the scope of things. Now, where is the US direction headed? This is visceral for you. I don't need to tell you how these things are happening, but in terms of the economy, you've seen how many people are out of work. You know people who are out of work. The US economy is like this horse that has fallen over. But what is Wall Street being propelled by? This is Jerome Powell, the head of the Fed, chairman of the Fed. And he is basically putting the silly horse hat and is pushing the economy forward. So it's based on an artifice of several $1 trillion being printed. And so Wall Street looks very good. And the Trump administration pushes the fact that the economy is soaring. But the reality of American economic life is very different. And this will have repercussions into the next administration, perhaps beyond. Here is the S&P 500. It doesn't show the slight decline in the last 2 days after it was known that President Trump contracted coronavirus, but that's not important. I want to look at the 5-year trend. And what you see here after 2020 is basically there was the coronavirus drop and it's risen all the way back to the top as if the virus never took place. And this is how out of touch American capitalism is with the American ordinary folk. And I think this is very bad for the global economy as well as for the United States because it's being put on a kind of ventilator, to use the coronavirus metaphor. What's in store? The FBI actually says that Islamic terrorism is not the biggest thing right now. It's these white nationalists and these types of things. Civil rights, human rights, you name it. There's a lot of violence. So all of you, I urge you to stay safe because the sort of leaks that are happening, what game theorists are saying about it, things could get quite ugly there. And I actually would feel safer in Islamabad than in just about any American city now. And I think this is very worrying. And what that means for America overall is that while it has so many internal rifts, its external policy is not strong. If it does want to challenge China and bring Pakistan, drag it along in that, it's not in a good negotiating position to do that. So here is a knight in the US trade policy and it's asking China, are you scared yet? And the Europeans are saying, well, that's quite an unusual negotiating position, because right now what the world needs, especially in coronavirus, is for a cooperation in keeping the international system and its institutions alive. Pakistan strongly advocates for that international cooperation. It also argues strongly for debt relief for the third world. I think that the architecture of the economy globally really needs to be reconsidered. And the US does have a leadership position in that. As Pakistani Americans, you have to articulate that Pakistan is an important player in that. It wants to play along with the global system and it wants to contribute its little part. So in conclusion, I want to say that things could get ugly, but I want to also look at the positive. Pakistan's view on race relations, all of this strife, is very much conciliatory. Pakistan wants to have good relations with India, with Afghanistan, and so on, with America, working together to build a new architecture in such a difficult time. And I think it's captured best by this truck art, which was in memory of George Floyd. And it's actually the caption on the side, which says, "Na goron ki, na kalon ki, ye duniya hai dil walon ki." And I think this captures the spirit of Pakistan today. And it's something that as Pakistani Americans, it resonates with you. It's just that the world around you is changing so fast. So stick to these precepts of the Pakistan psyche. Na goron ki, na kalon ki, ye duniya hai dil walon ki. And with that, I'd like to return the mic to Sir Nadeem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Osman. That was wonderful. And I especially would like to have an access to the slide that you had about terror finance, the FATF, and that is something for us to, when we have discussion with the U.S. Legislatures, that so many times they point towards that, and when armed with that kind of information, I think we can have an intelligent conversation with them.
Certainly.
Thank you. I'm going to start, I'm going to open it up for Q&A. I see some questions have already started flowing in. We will have about, and Haris, would you confirm with me? I think we have about 45 minutes, or is it less than that? I think it's, I take that back. I think we have about 25 minutes left for Q&A. So thank you to both the speakers and the President Cass for doing everything on time. So we're doing well. I have the first question already here, and it's from Dr. Kamran, and it's regarding, and it's to Ambassador Jilani. It's in light of your mentioning the Quad Plus, or how you refer to it as the new Asian NATO. Do you think that Pakistan will be perceived as to continue to be a bridge between China and USA after the Afghan peace is materialized and American financial interest will remain in that part of the world?
Well, you know, US interest in this region would not be confined to Afghanistan only. Afghanistan is very important for a variety of reasons. US would like Afghanistan to stabilize, and so is Pakistan, because Pakistan is one country which has suffered the most. What would be the outcome of the ongoing peace process? Again, there are too many ifs and buts. To be very honest, despite our best efforts that Pakistan and the US are putting together in making this dialogue process a success, there are internal dynamics within Afghanistan which have to be taken into account. For instance, the constitutional aspects, the rewriting the constitution of Afghanistan, it's an uphill task. The power sharing mechanism, again, that's a very uphill task. How would the various groups will agree to a power sharing formula? Then there are internal opposition to this process. I'm not really sure if there is an internal consensus in support of the ongoing peace of process within Afghanistan. Then financial viability that you have rightly pointed out, because once the US troops withdraw from Afghanistan, whether the American Congress would be willing to approve the kind of money that it has appropriated for Afghanistan will continue to do so in the future. There is a big question mark. And same is the case with other NATO allies of the US who have been engaged in Afghanistan. So it is certainly, this process is fraught with many challenges, but we only hope that, but then as I mentioned, that in South Asia, for instance, this Asian NATO, whether it will become a reality is again something which is, there is a big question mark. Because if you are witnessing the developments in South Asia, the smaller South Asian countries which had been totally under the subjugation of India for so many years, whether it was Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, they are now slowly and gradually coming out of the Indian orbit, and they are getting closer to China. I was just reading before the start of this discussion an article whereby there are huge protests which are going on in Maldives, which is this tiny island state, against the presence of Indian troops, and they are demanding the immediate withdrawal of U.S. troops from Maldives. In Nepal, for instance, which has been a client state for a number of years, they have now started challenging the Indian might. And they have, as a matter of fact, issued their own map, which has been approved by their parliament. And they have shown those areas which are disputed between India and Nepal as Nepalese territories. Similarly, Sri Lanka also is getting closer. What I'm saying that the countries, Asian countries, will have to be very careful that they do not really become a pawn in the hands of these two major powers and then end up burning their own fingers. So that is going to be something. As far as Pakistan is concerned, our importance lies apart from Afghanistan and so many other factors. Like I mentioned, Iran is an important factor. China is perhaps the most important factor because of our very close relationship with China and many of the other Asian countries. So these are some of the realities that we will have to grapple with.
Thank you. Thank you. My next question is actually, it is from Dr. Timur, and the same question is, here we go, from Habib Saab. Let's see, Masood Habib Saab. So both questions, and the question is for you, Dr. Osman. The financial implication you have mentioned, and I think part of that was the revival of our economy. What here we go. So what are your thoughts of the effects of travel ban from the United States? Whenever travel advisories are issued, what are the effects of that, financial effects of that on Pakistan's economy?
Sure, the travel bans tend to be extremely negative for any society. There has been some work to quantify how travel bans are working around the world. The scope goes into the tens of billions of dollars. Pakistan's air travel was not as large as some of the other countries. Despite that, we did feel that pinch. However, flights are now open, so the temporality of things allowed for the restoration of economic activity in aviation to take place sooner. So I'm not too worried about that in Pakistan, but I am worried about global aviation. And CAS recently did another webinar on this, and the prognosis is extremely negative for global aviation. Many people predict, I mean, the heads of global aerospace companies predict that it won't come back to normalcy until 2023, 2024. And travel bans are a big part of that problem because there's simply not enough air traffic to fill up the seats. And so that's why you're seeing layoffs in the tens of thousands for all of the major aviation companies, sir. So yes, for the globe, I do see it as a very big negative.
Thank you. Thank you. Ambassador Jilani, I want to build on that question and just redirect it towards you. There has been, within the Pakistani diaspora, the understanding that the Indian lobby uses their contact with the American legislator with the State Department to initiate these travel bans towards Pakistan as a tool to punish it financially. Do you have any comments to that effect?
Well, they have certainly been one of the major factors, I would say, not the only factor, because they keep painting Pakistan in a negative light on almost every issue. And there are scores of propaganda themes which are being spread by them. But it's a combination of the Indian diaspora plus sometimes the media reports also generated from Pakistan, they also create some kind of a negativity. And the third very important factor, as I mentioned, that are some of our own people in the US who keep painting Pakistan in a negative light. So all these factors combined together, they feed into this travel advisory decision as far as the US is concerned.
All right, thank you so much. My next question is also, it's in response to your comment, Ambassador Jilani, but I think it will shift towards the Air Chief Marshal Kaleem Sadat as well. It's regarding, you had mentioned about the connecting the second generation of American with the motherland, of their forefather. Number one, are there any programs that you have already initiated to that level, or is that something that I can provide a platform for and then moving forward work with CAS? And would CAS be the one interested in hosting something like this?
Well, routinely, if you see time and again, the army invites these tourists from abroad, takes them to the northern areas, etc. They make documentary, etc., to project a positive image of Pakistan. The Air Force, what it does is that we have international conferences, etc., and to the visitors, we take them on an air safari to the northern areas, etc. So it can be, a program can be worked out. It will be between different institutions. Each will share a little bit of burden, but a package can be made which will give them a all-round exposure of the Pakistani society, both rural, urban, tourism, and the rest, sightseeing, etc.
Thank you, Air Chief Marshal Kaleem Sadat. Thank you, Ambassador Jalil Abbas Jilani, and thank you, Dr. Usman Chauhan. Air Chief Marshal Kaleem Sadat, I will give you the last word. Before we do that, I want to thank all the viewers, all the attendees. I want to especially mention our friends from APNA, the Association of Pakistani Physicians of North America. I also want to recognize some friends from the Pak American Business Forum, who again are doing a wonderful job, and all the PACs that I've mentioned before, and the Kashmir Solidarity Council, the Crescent Foundation, the CARE, the ICNA Relief, and ISNA. Thank you all. I'll give you the last word, Air Chief Marshal Kaleem Sadat, and again, thank you so much and goodbye from Dallas.
Thank you. Well, you have heard the two speakers, and they have highlighted the important areas. Ambassador Jilani is optimistic that Pakistan and US relations will continue on the positive path. There will not be a rupture, etc., that he anticipates. And of course, his emphasis on encouraging investment and trade and commerce with Pakistan, that needs an emphasis. And like Dr. Osman highlighted, that this FATF is being used politically by the United States, by India, and to attain other objectives. It has got nothing to do with the money laundering, etc., or to the extent of money laundering that is taking place. So they want to just browbeat Pakistan with this to attain other geostrategic objectives, whether to exert greater influence on the Taliban on the part of Pakistan to get them out of Afghanistan in a dignified manner, etc. So that is one of the objectives there. But what I wish to request from the Pakistani community over there is that we need to tell our interlocutors that America has security interests, but so have other countries, Pakistan included. So in the development or maintenance of any relationship, there has to be a balance, that Pakistani political and strategic and security interests have to be given due consideration if this relationship is to be possible. It cannot happen that Pakistan security interests can be thrown out of the window and everything that America wants, it should be done. Like they also hold this against Pakistan, that Pakistan fights the war on terror in a limited scope or in limited areas and not the way the Americans want them to fight. The reality is that everybody has to fight his own wars. Nobody will fight for, so far Pakistan in the past has made this mistake, but moving forward into the future, I think the Pakistani government is very clear that our interests will drive what we do, what we contribute to any kind of coalition or any kind of joint effort, etc. So we had last week, not last week, but about 3 days ago, we had a webinar with the Naval Postgraduate School in California. And to them also, there was a good discussion. And we underlined this particular aspect, that Pakistani interests are very important and they cannot be ignored. If you say that it is a one-way street, it is not a one-way street, at least not going. Especially so when there is no quid pro quo of military aid or economic aid that is going on. Right now, all that is stopped, So it has to be the convergence of our objectives that will drive the policy on our side, from both sides. This point was made in one of the questions that, the tilt towards India is about the attractiveness of the size of the Indian economy. The investors want to invest over there. Pakistan, unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, has been moving. Pakistani economy has been shrinking for the last 2-3 years. So the economy has to begin to expand before it could, interest the investors from the US, for example. But I hope and pray that that turnaround will come in the near future, because we are up to zero growth and it is supposed to turn positive sometime in the next 1 or 2 years. And so from there on, the investors would be interested in over here. The other issues are that our BRI, etc., they keep criticizing, but that is ill-founded, like Dr. Usman explained it to you, that they say it is not transparent. I mean, how do they know what is transparent and what is not transparent? As long as it is transparent with the Pakistanis, it is okay. And the other thing is that they say the IMF will not loan money to Pakistan to pay out BRI debts. The BRI debts or CPEC debts are not falling due for the next 20 years, So there is no case for, IMF or American aid being converted to, pay off CPEC debts. So there are these misunderstandings, and these are motivated by a general unfriendly attitude on the part of the government towards Pakistan, that gives rise to this. Otherwise, if the dialogue remains open, if we sit across the table and we consult and converse with an open mind, we will come to a conclusion that, the other side is not the devil that it is perceived to be. They also are human beings, they also have interests, etc. And they also look to live in peace and prosperity like any other person.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Again, all the panelists. Again, I just want to add one more sentence before we say goodbye, is that what I look forward to is hopefully in the future, we can host you in Dallas or New York or Washington, D.C., and have some of our friends in Congress or, the local legislatures in the audience. So, as experts, you can make your point much better than we can. Obviously, what you have done today here gives us enough material, enough things to ponder upon and take it with us and then propagate it to the right audience. And again, before the event started, I mentioned that in future, maybe we can take certain niche from today's broader conversation, where we can just focus on certain aspects of the bilateral relations and take it from there. Go ahead.
I think there were a lot of questions that remained unanswered. So
Yes.
at a future date, we could get together. It's so convenient. I mean, there's
Yes.
no hassle involved. It's just a bit of a coordination is required, and then we can converse again.
Air Chief Marshal Kaleem Sadat, Ambassador Jalil Abbas Jilani, and Dr. Usman Chauhan, thank you so much. Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you so much. Khuda Hafiz.
Have a nice day. Have a nice day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Khuda Hafiz.